Thank you guys so much for joining us today on Talking Sense. We have a special guest that we've asked to come in and do a series of conversations about loss. She's gained some traction on TikTok, sharing her experiences and the emotions that go with those. And we're just so grateful to have her. That's Katie Caruthers. Thank you so much for setting aside some time and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I would love to know, I know the catalyst for what got you going here, generally speaking, was the loss of your mom. But what made you decide to go to TikTok with this?
Well, I have been creating content for a very long time, specifically on TikTok for about 4 years now. Now, granted, not about grief, not about loss.
Mm-hmm.
I have been making content about all sorts of things. And then when I lost my mom back in May, it was very unexpected. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and I could not make content about anything else. I couldn't do anything. And I found myself in my mom's house, cleaning out her closet, and I was just paralyzed. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't go through clothes. So one day I finally just decided to start making TikToks and start making fun of her as a joke, just about all the white button-ups she had. And they started to take off. I wasn't expecting it. It was a form of therapy and distraction. And then it turned into a way that I could help educate others, just to relate to them, but also hopefully they wouldn't go through some of the same things that my brother and I are currently going through. So really beautiful in a weird way, and just something nice to throw myself into during such a terrible time.
And I have to acknowledge, I've lost my mom suddenly as well. And you're right, that shock and awe, that first few days where it's hard to even believe this thing has happened. This person who's been such a big part of your life is just no longer there. And there's so much emotional toll that takes. And then when you get through the shock piece of it, the awe comes in with all the things that have to be done. And I think a lot of us aren't aware that they exist in the first place. We don't prepare for that. And then our family is stuck in this kind of chaos that is created by our lack of preparedness. And from what I've observed, a lot of your content is about, yes, adding some humor, but also giving people practical tips and things to be aware of.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important for people to see this kind of thing because my mom was considerably young. This was unexpected and it came out of nowhere. And I think if she had known what we would be dealing with after her death, she may have done some things differently. Not that we blame her, but a little more to help this whole situation.
Yeah. And I think that's, greatly in alignment with what we try to do here at Talking Sense is help people understand how to be better prepared for life in general. And, some of the early emotions, we talked about shock, overwhelming grief, those moments where, like you were talking about going through her closet. I had a similar situation going through paperwork. My mom had file cabinet after file cabinet of paperwork and just trying to figure out what mattered, what didn't. And then the stress of making decisions, being that person who has to make all those decisions. Those were kind of the things like in the earliest pieces. But then when you get into the things that may not be on your radar, and you experience this as well, is that not having an organized estate in that they didn't have their papers in order. They maybe didn't have beneficiaries on certain accounts and trying to figure out all of that. And I lost my stepdad shortly after my mom and realizing that I'm not his legal heir and he didn't have a legal will. And so having to go through probate and all of that, it was just a lot. Have you experienced some of that too?
Absolutely. I have found myself honestly just mad at the world because my worst fear in the world was that something was going to happen to my mom. She was my best friend. We have been close since the day I was born. And I was and am currently living my nightmare. And I feel like I haven't even been able to focus on the grief or how I'm feeling because you do, like I talk about on my TikTok, you have to go into this business mode. And we had to enter that before my mom even passed in the hospital. We were being asked a ton of questions and had to fill out things and think about what we knew was about to happen. And I was just mad. I was mad that I was not, and I'm still not fully allowed to grieve. And I don't think I will until well past probate, well past all of these accounts are closed. And it's heartbreaking because I just want to grieve my mom. And I feel like the world is me I'm not allowed to right now.
Yes, and if I don't know if this has been your experience, but for me it was like everything felt so hard. Like making sure her car payment was still made was hard. Making sure
Mhm.
that, any bills that need to be paid were covered. Like everybody wants all this detail from me that I don't even know. I don't know my mom's social security number. I don't know, whether she wanted this to be dealt with that way or that, it's just everything should be easier, I felt like. Let me have a moment. But everything had to
Right.
be done right away.
Absolutely. And I have always considered myself, I'm still stuck at 16 years old. I have always felt like a kid.
Hmm.
And from the moment my mom died, I had to become an adult. I had to grow up very fast. And there were just so many things that I had no idea about, my brother had no idea about. And it's just strange to go from feeling like this kid, especially when you have your parents, you will always be their kid. And
Hmm.
then suddenly you're the adult and you have to figure it out. You have no other choice.
And in my family dynamics, mom was the one you went to when you needed
Yeah.
advice, when you needed an adulty adult in the room, that's who you went to. And so to have to pick up all of this stuff and run with it. And in my case, my siblings weren't in a good place emotionally and did not appreciate even the things I was doing, which made it harder. It was very almost like the gift that just keeps giving for a
Right.
while.
Hmm.
And we've talked about, the financial side of this when we were talking offline about, my parents would have done estate planning if they had known how expensive it would be to take care of their estate when they were no longer here. Way more
Right.
expensive.
Oh, absolutely. And my mom was actually the kicker to all of it. She was in the middle of getting her estate set up. She was in the middle of getting a trust set up for my brother and me. And because she was dealing with my grandparents' estate, which is a
Mm.
whole
So you've got an
other.
extra layer here.
Oh, I've got a lot of extra layers. Yes. So she was in the middle of that. I think that she was waiting until my grandparents' estate was fully settled,
Mm-hmm.
and then she had this all set up for us because she didn't want us to be left with this mess. And unfortunately, death waits for no one.
Mm-hmm.
It does not care about your timing, and we were left with a mess.
Mm-hmm. And are you still trying to take care of your grandparents' estate now that she's no longer here as well?
Oh, yes. It has
Mm.
been going on. My grandfather died in 2020, grandmother in 2022. And my mom and her sisters, they did not get along.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandparents did not properly fund their trust. They had a trust set up, but they
Mm-hmm.
didn't put all their assets in it. So there has been this power struggle and court battle for two
Oh.
years. And that's ultimately what the stress of that is what led to my mom's death.
Mm.
So it's hard to think about because it was preventable on so many different levels. But yeah, my brother and I were thrown into the middle of that. There were three girls, and now my brother and I are taking control of my mom's part. We don't know what's going on. Thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
my helping to guide us through it, but it's awful. It's I have no idea what's going on most of the time.
And that leads into something else we talked about, which is the family dynamics. Is even families that have really strong relationships, when you're dealing with loss, you're not always your best self.
Yeah.
And, so my brother and sister and I would have these conversations, and it was like they would think that I wasn't taking care of things the right way or in the right timeline, not realizing that I'm not in control. That's the biggest piece I think that people don't realize is you have very little control over the timeline, over the process. And it was so frustrating to try to explain that, but it created a ton of chaos in my family.
Right. I consider myself very lucky. I have been able to get a front row seat to both sides of this
Mm-hmm.
because when it comes to my brother and me, it is the best case scenario. We are so close. We have the best relationship. We will always put our relationship over anything else that
Mm-hmm.
is happening. We're on the same page about everything. There is no contesting. I think as
Nice.
far as probate goes, it's going to be the easiest that it can be because of
Mm-hmm.
where we. Then I watched my mom with her sisters who were at each other's throats, who were constantly struggling for that power. And it's just very interesting to see. But for my mom's estate, I have the best case scenario, and it's
Yeah.
still really difficult.
That's what I was going to say. Even the best case scenario is still horrible.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about, again, for you, your initial stages, because one of the things you have to do, we'll talk more in detail about later, is when you're doing probate, you have to do an inventory. Like you literally have to sit and write out everything that this person owned.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about your experience with that.
I got lucky in that in the sense that my mom is very predictable and has had the same passwords to everything since I was born.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I finally was able to sit down at her computer to try and get a handle on everything that was happening, I didn't know all her bills. I didn't know her debt. I didn't know anything really.
Mm-hmm.
And I got on her computer and I was able to access about 99% of her accounts.
Okay.
And yes, best case scenario, just get a handle on it. But I know a lot of people don't have that ability.
Mm-hmm.
And so the things I encourage people to do all the time is make sure that your kids, your loved ones, your spouses know your passwords to things, that they know your bills, your debts, so that they can have that list for them so that they don't have to go searching. I spent days and weeks at my mom's computer trying to compile a list of
Mm-hmm.
what I was to do.
So I was in kind of a different but similar situation with my mom. She had had some significant health challenges. We thought we were going to lose her 5 years prior. She had a reaction after surgery. And at that time, I just took everything over. And thankfully, her computer was not password protected, so I could get on it and help my dad out for a while and just reset all of her passwords to something I would remember because we weren't sure if she was going to get out of the hospital. And, my dad was not a technology person and she was. And so I reset all her passwords. Well, she never changed them. So I was able to. But it was still, like you said, you're spending hours upon hours upon hours. So, as an action step for those that are listening, if you could use either a password manager and make sure someone you trust has the singular password that gets you in, or create something that has those passwords that you keep up to date but keep securely, that can help the person who's stepping in to take care of this for you if something does happen. And what can you do to help yourself? If you were to talk to somebody that is in this kind of journey or is entering this because they've lost someone just recently, what would you say were like the top things that you would encourage them to consider?
Consider as far as the
What can they
steps to take.
do? Yeah, what can they do?
First, breathe because it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely overwhelming. And I tell people all the time, especially when it comes to the topic of being overwhelmed, is how do you eat an elephant? One
Mm-hmm.
bite at a time. And so for this, I have really had to take things one step at a time. I also think just asking for help. I have reached out to so many family members, my mom's friends who might know information that I don't know. I definitely put my pride aside for anything. I reached out to anyone and everyone. There were certain supplemental insurance accounts that I had no idea about. So I texted her coworkers and I
Mm-hmm.
said, do you know anything about this? So asking for help would be big. Making lists. I am a list person. I need to see something physically on a piece of paper and going
Same.
across that. It helps my ADHD brain.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just know it's going to be a long process. It's not going to be fun, but it is doable, as long as you can get as organized as possible.
And I think what helped me was this concept that I learned with the military family was hurry up and wait. There are things you have
Mm-hmm.
to do quickly, but then pause, take some time
Mm-hmm.
to breathe and give yourself the opportunity to go through that systemically. I think sometimes people feel pressured to hurry up and get everything settled as quickly as possible, but you do need some room to let your emotions
Mm-hmm.
settle before you start making financial decisions. The other thing that kind of rung a bell with what you were talking about was this concept of eating the elephant. The best advice I went through in my divorce that I was able to also apply to losing my mom several months later was do the next logical thing. Just take the next logical step. Make your long list, but ask
Right.
yourself, what can I accomplish in the next 24 hours? Pick one
Mm-hmm.
thing if you need to, or pick none if you need a day to just sit and be in your emotions. But just try to do the next logical thing instead of trying to do it all in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Yes.
probate is needed, you need to start that as soon as possible. That is one of those things that just go ahead and do. Part of that being creditors only have so long to reach
Mm-hmm.
out and say that your parents owed money or whoever it is that you're taking care of. So starting that as soon as possible helps get it done.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Katie. We're going to be back for 2 more episodes, but we always do kind of like our last 2 cents at the end. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with anybody listening today?
Oh gosh, I have a million thoughts. But I think what I've learned in this process, especially putting my grief online, is that millions of people are going through this at the exact same time you are. You are not alone. You can ask for help. There are ways through this. And it's helped me to know, as lonely of a feeling as it is, even though I'm surrounded by the most incredible friends and family, it's very easy to feel alone, but I'm not. People out there who know exactly what I'm going through, and there are experts that can help me in situations that I have no idea what's going on.
Yes, and my final thought actually circles back to something you said earlier. Ask for help. Don't try to go it alone. If you don't have the family support, you've got friends, you've got people that knew the person you've lost that can help you through this. Don't try to go it alone. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today as we talked about kind of the shock and awe, early stages of loss. We're coming back next week with more. We're going to talk about the business. You talked about getting in that business mind, the business, this task list that you need to get together if you lose somebody to make sure you get through those steps as efficiently as possible. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes. The Jim Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or by calling our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and Jim Wealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.